Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The scent of pine and damp earth clung to everything in the great hall. Walls, tapestries, even the air itself seemed saturated with the forest's ancient breath. I stood near the back, fingers twisted in the rough fabric of my dress, trying to make myself smaller than I already felt. Invisible, that had always been my specialty. Tonight was the bonding ceremony, the night when Alpha King Demon Frost would officially announce his engagement to Celine Ashford, the most beautiful wolf in 3 territories. Everyone who mattered had gathered here: pack leaders, their mates, warriors decorated with scars and silver. And then there was me, Isla Thorne, the orphaned daughter of a trader, allowed to attend only because my late mother had once served in the kitchens. I shouldn't have come. But something my mother told me before she died kept echoing in my mind. When everyone looks away, you must learn to see what they cannot. She'd been cryptic in her final days, feverish and broken. But those words had burrowed into me like seeds waiting for the right season to bloom. The hall buzzed with conversation, glasses clinking, laughter sharp as broken glass. I watched Celine glide through the crowd in a gown that shimmered like moonlight on water, her dark hair cascading down her back in perfect waves. She was everything I wasn't: confident, admired, powerful. When she laughed, heads turned. When she spoke, people listened. When I spoke, they looked past me as if I were smoke. I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders, the threadbare wool doing little against the chill that seeped through the stone walls. My hair, pale as winter wheat, hung limp around my face. I'd tried to braid it earlier, but my hands had been shaking too much. Fear did that to me, turned me clumsy, made me forget how to breathe properly. The massive doors at the front of the hall groaned open, and silence fell like a curtain dropping. He entered. Alpha King Demon Frost. Even from across the room, I felt the weight of his presence, a gravity that pulled at something deep in my chest. He was tall, shoulders broad beneath the dark fur cloak that swept behind him. His hair was black as a raven's wing, jaw carved from granite, eyes the color of steel in winter. But it was the loneliness that struck me most. Despite being surrounded by hundreds, he looked utterly, devastatingly alone. Our pack elders said he'd lost his family young, that he'd built his kingdom on the bones of enemies and the loyalty of those who had nowhere else to go. They said he didn't know how to smile anymore. Looking at him now, I believed it. Celine moved toward him with practiced grace, and he extended his hand. She took it, and the crowd erupted in polite applause. I clapped too, the sound hollow in my ears. "Beautiful couple, aren't they?" someone murmured nearby. "Perfect match. She'll make a strong queen." I should have agreed. Should have smiled and nodded and faded back into the shadows where I belonged. But my mother's voice whispered again, "When everyone looks away, you must learn to see." And I had seen something 3 nights ago. I'd been walking back from the river where I washed clothes for the pack house, taking the long path through the woods because it was quieter, because I could pretend for a few stolen moments that I wasn't the girl everyone pitied or ignored. That's when I'd heard voices, low, urgent, careful. I'd frozen behind a cluster of birch trees, heart hammering, knowing I should leave but unable to move. "The ceremony is in 3 days." That was Celine's voice, unmistakable in its crystalline clarity. "He'll be vulnerable then. Everyone will be watching us, not the perimeter." "And you're certain he suspects nothing?" A male voice, rough and unfamiliar. "Demon trusts me completely. The fool actually believes I love him." She'd laugh then, a sound like ice cracking. "By midnight, the Blackthorn pack will control the northern territories. And you, my love, will stand beside me as king. My blood had turned to frost in my veins. I'd pressed my hand against the tree bark, splinters digging into my palm, grounding me in reality. This couldn't be real, but it was. I'd run home that night, barricaded myself in my tiny room, and tried to convince myself I'd misheard. That fear and loneliness had finally cracked my mind. But the next day, I'd watched Celine more carefully. I'd seen how her eyes slid past Demon when he spoke to her, how her smile never quite reached her gaze. I'd noticed the strange wolves lingering at the territory's edge, wearing blackthorn colors poorly concealed beneath traveling cloaks, and I'd realized that I knew something that could destroy everything, or save it. The problem was simple. Who would believe me? Isla Thorne, the trader's daughter, the girl who couldn't even maintain eye contact during pack meetings. If I spoke up publicly, they'd think I was delusional, jealous, or worse, continuing my father's legacy of treachery. But if I said nothing, Demon would die tonight. And despite having never spoken a single word to him, despite being beneath his notice in every possible way, I couldn't let that happen. Not when I'd seen the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he carried the weight of thousands on shoulders that seemed too tired to bear it anymore. He deserved the truth, even if it came from someone like me. The ceremony proceeded with formal speeches and traditional blessings. I barely heard them. My mind raced, planning, discarding options, planning again. I had to get close to him. Had to whisper the warning before midnight, before the attack came. But how? I wasn't allowed near the high table. Guards stood at every entrance, and pack hierarchy was absolute. I was pond water, and he was the sky. We existed in different worlds. The feast began, tables groaning under the weight of roasted meats and honeyed bread. Wine flowed freely, loosening tongues and lowering guards. I watched servants move between the tables, watched how they approached the high table where Demon sat with Celine at his right hand, her fingers possessively curled around his arm. An idea formed, dangerous and desperate. I slipped into the kitchen, heart pounding so hard I thought my ribs might crack. The head cook, Marta, looked up from a tray of pastries, her weathered face creasing with surprise. Isla? What are you doing back here? My voice cracked. I swallowed, tried again. I wanted to help. Serve. I know I'm not supposed to, but I thought. She studied me for a long moment, and I saw the pity in her eyes. Everyone knew my story. The orphan girl with nowhere to go. No real place in the pack. Finally, she sighed. Take that tray up to the high table. Don't drop it. Don't speak unless spoken to. And for the love of the moon, don't embarrass me. My hands shook as I lifted the heavy silver tray laden with crystal glasses filled with dark red wine. The weight of it felt like the weight of fate itself. I moved through the crowd, invisible as always, just another servant in a shapeless dress. No one looked at me. No one ever did. For once, I was grateful. As I approached the high table, my pulse roared in my ears. Demon was speaking with one of his advisors, his profile sharp and severe in the candlelight. Celine sat beside him, but her attention had drifted to a group of visiting nobles, her smile calculated and cold. I reached the table, began distributing the glasses with hands that trembled so badly, I nearly dropped one. An advisor took his wine without glancing up. A visiting alpha nodded absently. And then I was standing beside Demon Frost. Up close, he was even more devastating. I could see the faint scar along his jaw, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, the exhaustion etched into the corners of his eyes. He radiated power, but also something else, something that made my chest ache with recognition. Loneliness, bone deep and ancient. I set down his glass, and for one impossible moment, his eyes lifted to meet mine. They were gray, like storm clouds before lightning strikes. For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. No one ever really looked at me, not like this, not with actual focus, as if I might be something more than empty space. This was my chance, my only chance. I leaned down, closer than I should have, close enough that my lips nearly brushed his ear, close enough to smell leather and winter wind and something wild that made my wolf stir for the first time in years. Your fiancé is betraying you, I whispered, voice barely audible even to supernatural hearing. My words came fast, desperate. They're coming tonight. Blackthorn Pack. Midnight. She's with them. I felt him go absolutely still, the kind of stillness that precedes violence. I straightened quickly, but not before I saw Celine's head turn, her eyes narrowing as she noticed me standing too close, lingering too long. Her beautiful face hardened into something ugly for just a fraction of a second, before the mask slipped back into place. Fear clawed up my throat. What had I done? Demon's hand shot out, fingers closing around my wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop me from fleeing. His touch sent electricity racing up my arm, and I gasped. "Wait," he said, his voice low and rough as gravel. "Don't move." The world narrowed to the point where his skin met mine, calloused fingers wrapped around my wrist, warm despite the winter chill that permeated everything else. My heart hammered against my ribs like something wild trying to escape a cage. Celine's voice cut through the moment, sweet as poisoned honey. "Demon, darling. Who is this?" She leaned forward, her perfect smile not quite reaching her eyes as they raked over me with barely concealed disdain. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "No one," I managed, the word crumbling in my throat. "I'm no one. Just—" "She's a servant," one of the advisors said dismissively, already turning back to his conversation. "Thorn's daughter." The name landed like a stone in still water. I watched the ripples of recognition move across faces, the slight recoil, the narrowed eyes, the way people shifted as if treachery might be contagious. My father had tried to sell pack secrets to rivals 15 years ago. They'd caught him, executed him, and the stain had never washed clean. Demon's grip on my wrist didn't loosen, but something shifted in his expression. His eyes, those winter gray eyes, searched my face with an intensity that made me want to disappear into the floor. "Leave us," he said quietly. "But Demon?" Celine began, her hand reaching for his shoulder. "Not you." His gaze hadn't left mine. "Everyone else. Clear the high table. Now." The authority in his voice was absolute. Chairs scraped against stone. Advisors and nobles retreated with barely concealed confusion, casting glances over their shoulders. Celine remained frozen, her composure cracking at the edges. I said everyone. Demon's words were soft, but they carried the weight of an alpha king who'd never learned to ask twice. Celine rose with practiced grace, but I saw her hands clench in the folds of her gown. "Of course, my love. I'll be just over there if you need me." She brushed past me, and I caught her whisper, meant only for my ears. "You'll regret this, little ghost." Then we were alone. Or as alone as one could be in a hall filled with hundreds, all pretending not to watch while absolutely watching. Demon released my wrist but gestured to the chair beside him, the one Celine had just vacated. "Sit." "I can't. I shouldn't." "Sit. Please." The addition of that last word surprised us both. I sat because my legs had started shaking too badly to hold me. The chair was still warm from Celine's presence, and I felt like an imposter. A fraud dressed in servant's clothes playing at being someone who mattered. "Tell me everything," Demon said, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond our small bubble of space. "And don't leave anything out," so I did. I told him about the night 3 days ago, about stumbling upon the conversation in the woods, about Selena's words and the male voice I didn't recognize. I described the blackthorn wolves I'd spotted at the territory's edge, the way they'd tried to hide their markings but failed. I told him about watching Celine more carefully, about the coldness I'd seen when she thought no one was looking. My words tumbled out in a rush, tripping over each other, and I was certain he wouldn't believe me. Why would he? I was the daughter of a traitor, and she was the woman he'd chosen to rule beside him. But he listened. Actually listened, his focus never wavering, his expression growing harder with each detail I shared. "Why tell me?" he asked when I'd finished. "Why not go to my guards, my advisors? Why risk approaching me directly?" I twisted my hands in my lap, staring at them because I couldn't bear to meet his eyes anymore, because they wouldn't have believed me. You know they wouldn't. And by the time they finished questioning me, investigating my claims. It would have been too late. I swallowed hard. And because you deserve to know the truth. Even if it comes from someone like me, someone like you, he repeated. And there was something strange in his tone. You mean someone brave enough to risk everything to warn a king who's never even spoken to you before? I mean someone whose word means nothing. Someone people cross the street to avoid. Silence stretched between us, heavy with things I didn't understand. When I finally worked up the courage to look at him, I found him studying me with an expression I couldn't read. Your father betrayed the pack, he said, and I flinched. But you are not your father. I learned that lesson the hard way. Something dark passed across his face. My own father nearly destroyed our territories before I was forced to challenge him. Blood doesn't define us. Our choices do. The words settled over me like a blanket I hadn't known I needed. Before I could respond, he stood abruptly. Come with me. We don't have much time. What? Where, if what you've told me is true, and I believe it is, then Celine and her allies will be watching me closely now. They'll have seen us talking. We need to move quickly. He held out his hand. Trust me. I stared at that outstretched hand. Strong, scarred, attached to a man who'd just told me blood didn't define us. Slowly, hardly believing what I was doing, I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and solid, and he pulled me to my feet. The contact sent sparks racing up my arm, and my wolf, my quiet, dormant wolf who'd barely stirred in years, suddenly pressed against my consciousness with desperate interest. Demon led me through a side door, away from the feast and the watching eyes. We moved through corridors I'd only seen while cleaning, past tapestries depicting battles and coronations, past guards who snapped to attention as we passed. Sire, is everything? One began. Increase patrols at the northern border. Demon ordered, without breaking stride. Double the guards at every entrance, and find Commander Rowan. Tell him to meet me in my study immediately. This is a priority alert. The guard's eyes widened, but he saluted and took off at a run. We climbed a spiral staircase, my breath coming harder as we ascended. Finally, Demon pushed open a heavy wooden door and guided me into a room that could only be his private study. It was sparse, almost austere. A massive desk dominated the space, covered in maps and documents. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes that looked well-read rather than decorative. A fireplace crackled in the corner, the only source of warmth. But what struck me most was how utterly alone it felt. No personal items, no photographs, nothing that spoke of a life beyond duty and responsibility. Wait here, Demon said, finally releasing my hand. The absence of his touch felt like cold water. I need to gather my most trusted advisors, the ones I know Celine hasn't gotten to. How can you be sure? I asked, hugging myself against the sudden chill. Because they're the ones who warned me about her months ago. I didn't listen. His jaw clenched. I thought I was being strategic, forming an alliance with the Ashford pack. I thought... He trailed off, turning to stare into the fire. It doesn't matter what I thought. You thought you were protecting your people, I said softly. That's what leaders do. They make hard choices. He looked back at me, and for the second time that night I felt truly seen. What's your name? Your real name, not just Thorne's daughter. Isla, I whispered. Isla Thorne. Isla. He tested the word, and somehow it sounded different in his voice. Not like the name of a ghost, but like something real and solid. Thank you, Isla Thorne. You saved my life tonight, probably saved all of our lives. Before I could respond, the door burst open. A tall man with copper hair and a scar running down his left cheek strode in, followed by two others, a woman with silver streaks in her dark hair and a younger man who looked barely past 20. Demon, what's going on? The copper-haired man demanded. Your message said priority alert. Are we under attack? Not yet, but we will be. Demon gestured to me. This is Isla. She's brought intelligence about a planned assault from the Blackthorn pack. Tonight, midnight. All three pairs of eyes turned to me, and I wanted to sink into the floor. The woman stepped forward, her gaze sharp but not unkind. What did you see, child? I repeated my story for what felt like the 100th time, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. The woman, who introduced herself as Elder Mora, asked pointed questions about timing, about the voices I'd heard, about the wolves I'd seen. The copper-haired man, Commander Rowan, wanted details about their positioning and numbers. The younger man, a tracker named Felix, listened intently, his eyes occasionally flicking to Demon with something like concern. "It fits," Rowan said finally. "We've had reports of unusual movement along the northern border for weeks. I thought they were just testing our defenses, but if this is coordinated with someone inside—" "With Celine," Demon finished, his voice hard as stone. "My own fiancée. We need to verify this," Elder Mora said carefully. "Not because we doubt the girl, but because we need to know exactly what we're facing." "There's no time for extensive reconnaissance," Felix interjected. "If they're planning to strike at midnight, that gives us less than 4 hours. Then we prepare for war," Demon said. "Rowan, deploy our forces strategically. Make it look like normal security for the ceremony. But I want our best fighters positioned at every potential breach point. Felix, take a team and scout the northern approach. Quiet, quick. Confirm numbers if you can. Mora, I need you to quietly evacuate the non-combatants from the Great Hall. Make it look natural. Tired guests leaving early, that sort of thing." They nodded, already moving toward the door. "And Celine?" Rowan asked, pausing at the threshold. Demon's expression went cold. "Leave her to me. If she suspects we know, she might trigger the attack early. I need to keep her convinced everything is proceeding as planned." As they filed out, Elder Mora paused beside me. "You did well, child. Regardless of what happens tonight, you did well." Then she was gone, leaving me alone with Demon once more. He moved to his desk, spreading out a map of the territory with practiced efficiency. "You should stay here. It's the most secure room in the compound. There are guards stationed in the hallway, and—" "No," I said, surprising myself. He looked up, one eyebrow raised. "I can help," I continued, even as my voice wanted to fade. "I know you don't know me, and I'm not a warrior, but I've spent my whole life being invisible. No one notices me. I could watch, listen. If there are more traitors inside, people might speak freely around someone they consider beneath notice." Demon studied me for a long moment, and I saw him weighing the risks against the potential benefit. Finally, he nodded. "Stay close. Don't take unnecessary risks. And Isla," he waited until I met his eyes. "If things go wrong tonight, I want you to run. Promise me." "I can't promise that." "Why not?" "Because I'd spent 15 years running, I thought. Running from my father's legacy, from judgmental eyes, from connection and purpose and anything that might hurt me. And I was tired of running. Because," I said instead, "someone needs to make sure you don't do anything stupidly heroic and get yourself hurt." For the first time since I'd seen him enter the Great Hall hours ago, Demon Frost smiled. It was small, barely there, but it transformed his face completely. "Fair enough," he said. We returned to the Great Hall together, though Demon made sure to enter several paces ahead of me, maintaining the illusion that I was merely a servant who'd been summoned for some trivial matter. The feast continued in full swing, music swelling through the space, dancers spinning in elaborate patterns that mimicked the moon's phases. Everything looked perfectly normal, celebratory even, but I could see the subtle changes now that I knew what to look for. Commander Rowan stood near the main entrance, his posture deceptively casual as his eyes scanned the crowd. Elder Mora moved between tables, touching shoulders, whispering in ears, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, older pack members and those with young children began filtering toward the exits. Felix was nowhere to be seen, which meant he was already scouting the northern approach. And Celine. Beautiful, treacherous Celine, watching Demons return with eyes that glittered like broken glass in candlelight. She glided toward him immediately, her movements liquid grace, her smile perfect. "There you are, my love. You were gone so long I was beginning to worry." Her gaze slid to me, dismissive and cold. "I hope the servant girl wasn't bothering you with complaints. Just a minor issue with the kitchens," Demon said smoothly, accepting the wine glass she offered him. He didn't drink from it, I noticed. Nothing that couldn't be quickly resolved. Good. Celine's fingers traced up his arm possessively. Because tonight is about us, about our future together. The words dripped with honey, but I heard the steel beneath. She was testing him, looking for any sign that he knew. Of course, Demon agreed. And his performance was flawless. The devoted fiancé, slightly tired from political obligations, but attentive to his beautiful bride-to-be. Shall we dance? Her smile widened. I thought you'd never ask. I watched them move onto the dance floor, her red gowns swirling around them like spilled wine, his hand at her waist, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization. To everyone watching, they looked like the ideal couple, powerful, beautiful, destined to rule. But I saw how Demon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, how Celine's eyes kept darting toward the windows, toward the shadows, checking the time on the great clock that dominated the far wall, 10:30. An hour and a half until midnight. I slipped back into invisibility, moving through the crowd with a serving tray I'd grabbed from a passing attendant. No one questioned my presence. No one ever did. I was furniture, part of the background, as forgettable as the tapestries on the walls. And I listened. Near the wine table, 2 visiting wolves from a neighboring pack spoke in low voices. Have you noticed how many blackthorn wolves are lingering outside? Seems odd for a celebration that doesn't concern them. Probably hoping for scraps from the feast. You know how territorial disputes go. Always someone looking for an advantage. Not suspicion then, just casual observation. I moved on. By the musician's platform, I caught sight of a man I didn't recognize. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a distinctive scar across his knuckles. He stood too still, watching the crowd with the focus of a predator rather than a guest. When Elder Mora passed nearby, his hand moved subtly toward his belt, where I glimpsed the handle of a concealed blade. My heart kicked against my ribs. An insider. Someone planted among the guests. I couldn't reach Demon. He was still dancing with Celine, maintaining the charade, but Commander Rowan stood near enough. I made my way toward him, careful to look aimless, just a servant wandering through her duties. Sir, I murmured as I passed, setting down an empty glass on a nearby table. Near the musicians, scarred knuckles, armed. Rowan's expression didn't change, but I saw his stance shift slightly, his hand moving toward his own concealed weapon. Noted. He breathed. Good eye, girl. The dance ended. Demon escorted Selene back toward the high table, and I saw her whisper something in his ear that made him nod. She excused herself, gliding toward a side corridor, the one that led toward the powder rooms, but also toward a lesser-used exit. Demon caught my eye across the room. The look lasted only a second, but the meaning was clear. Follow her. My mouth went dry, but I nodded. I set down my tray and slipped after Celine, keeping enough distance that my footsteps wouldn't alert her supernatural hearing. The corridor grew darker as we moved away from the great hall, torches burning low in their sconces. Celine didn't go toward the powder rooms. Instead, she took a sharp turn down a service staircase that led toward the castle's lower levels, storage rooms, wine cellars, and more importantly, a delivery entrance that opened onto the northern courtyard. I followed, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain she'd hear it. The stairs were steep and narrow, forcing me to feel my way along the cold stone wall. Below, I heard Celine's footsteps stop, then voices. I pressed myself into an alcove, barely breathing, and peered around the corner. Celine stood in a small antechamber lit by a single torch. Across from her stood a man I recognized from that night in the woods, not by his face, which I hadn't seen, but by his voice. Rough, edged with ambition. Everything is in place, he said. His Blackthorn pack insignia was clearly visible now, no longer hidden. Our forces are positioned at 3 breach points. The moment the clock strikes midnight, we move. The northern gate will be opened from the inside. No, Celine interrupted sharply. Change of plans. We move earlier. 11:45. The man frowned. That wasn't agreed upon. The others won't be in position. I don't care. Something's wrong. Demon's been different since that little servant whispered in his ear. We can't risk him having time to prepare. Her voice turned vicious. I should have snapped that pale-haired pest's neck when I had the chance. Ice flooded my veins. She meant me. She'd noticed everything. 15 minutes earlier won't change much, the man argued. But if we're not fully coordinated, then you better move quickly. Celine stepped closer to him, and her tone became something else entirely. Intimate, possessive. Once this is over, once Demon is gone, and the Northern Territories are ours, we'll finally be free. No more pretending. No more playing the dutiful fiancé to a man too broken to see what's right in front of him. The man pulled her close, and they kissed with the hunger of conspirators who'd been forced to hide their connection for too long. When they broke apart, Celine's smile was cruel. Go. Signal the others, 11:45, and tell them to make it look like a legitimate challenge from Blackthorn. Territorial dispute gone violent. I want plausible deniability when this is over. He nodded and disappeared through a side door that led outside. Celine lingered a moment, adjusting her gown, smoothing her hair. Then she turned back toward the stairs, toward where I stood, frozen in my alcove. I had seconds to decide, try to slip away and risk her hearing me, or stay perfectly still and pray she passed without noticing. I chose stillness, pressing myself so tightly against the cold stone that I could feel every ridge and imperfection through my thin dress. I closed my eyes, slowed my breathing, and did what I'd spent a lifetime perfecting. I became nothing. Empty space. Air. Celine's footsteps climbed the stairs. Closer. Closer. She passed within inches of me, her perfume, jasmine and something darker, filling my nose. I didn't breathe. Didn't move. Didn't exist. Her footsteps continued upward, fading into the distance. I counted to 30 before I moved, my legs trembling so badly I nearly collapsed. 11:45. That gave us less than an hour now. I had to find Demon. Had to tell him about the changed timeline. About the inside contact who would open the northern gate. I ran up the stairs, no longer caring about stealth. Only speed. I burst into the corridor and nearly collided with a figure standing in the shadows. Strong hands caught my arms, steadying me. I looked up into Demon's face. Easy, he said quietly. I saw you follow her. What did you learn? The words tumbled out in a rush. The changed attack time. The northern gate. The man with the blackthorn insignia. Everything I'd heard. Demon's expression grew darker with each detail. 11:45, he repeated, glancing at the distant clock visible through an archway. That's 35 minutes from now. Can your people be ready in time? They'll have to be. He turned, already moving, but kept one hand on my arm. Whether to steady me or himself, I couldn't tell. Come with me. I'm not letting you out of my sight now. We moved quickly through the castle, Demon stopping only to give terse orders to guards we passed. Move to defensive positions. Attack imminent. Protect the civilians first. Each guard saluted and took off at a run, the urgency finally spreading through the compound like wildfire. We reached a secured room where Commander Rowan, Elder Mora, and Felix had gathered around a tactical map. Felix looked exhausted, mud on his boots. Confirmed, Felix reported immediately. At least 60 blackthorn wolves positioned in the forest beyond our northern border. They're trying to be subtle, but they're definitely preparing for an assault. They're moving the timeline up, Demon announced. 11:45, and we have an inside contact who plans to open the northern gate. Rowan swore viciously. That's barely half an hour. We need to let them open the gate, Demon said, and everyone froze. Sire. Elder Mora's voice was careful. If we block them completely, they'll scatter, and we'll never root out all of Celine's conspirators. But if we let them commit to the attack, let them think they have the advantage, we can end this decisively. Demon's finger traced the map. We fall back from the northern gate. Make it look lightly defended. Let them pour through. Then we spring the trap here, in the courtyard, where they'll be surrounded by our forces on all sides. That's risky, Rowan said. But there was approval in his voice. If the timing is off, even slightly, then we trust our people to adapt. You have your orders, Commander. Make it happen. Rowan nodded and strode out, already barking commands into a communication device. Felix followed, but Elder Mora lingered. She looked at me with something like understanding. The girl should be evacuated with the others. No, I said before Demon could respond. I need to see this through. Child, you've done more than enough. I know where Celine will be, I interrupted, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. She'll want to watch the attack, want to see Demon fall so she can play the grief-stricken fiancé. She'll position herself somewhere with a view but protected, and she might have other allies in the hall that we haven't identified. I can watch her, track her movements. No one notices me. I'm invisible. Demon and Elder Mora exchanged glances. She has a point, Demon said finally. But Isla, you stay in the Great Hall. Do not engage directly. If fighting reaches inside, I run. I know, I met his eyes. But not before. Something passed between us then. Understanding, respect, maybe even the first fragile threads of trust. He nodded once. The clock chimed 11:30, 15 minutes until betrayal arrived at our gates. Positions, Demon said quietly, and may the moon guide us through this darkness. We moved as one, returning to the great hall where guests still danced and drank, blissfully unaware that war was about to break down the doors. The great hall felt different now, like a stage set for tragedy. The music continued. Couples still swayed in elegant patterns. Wine still flowed freely. But beneath the surface of celebration, I could sense the coiled tension of warriors preparing for violence. Demon had returned to the high table, his posture relaxed, the perfect image of a king enjoying his engagement celebration. But I saw how his eyes tracked every movement, how his hand rested casually near the blade concealed at his hip. Celine sat beside him once more, her fingers drumming an impatient rhythm against her wineglass, her gaze repeatedly flickering to the ornate clock on the wall, 11:35. I moved through the crowd, that serving tray once again my excuse for existence. I watched Celine's allies reveal themselves through their nervousness. The man with scarred knuckles I'd spotted earlier, now positioned near the main doors. A woman in an emerald dress, who kept drifting toward the windows overlooking the northern courtyard. A visiting merchant who'd somehow acquired a sword, despite weapons being forbidden for guests. 3 confirmed traitors inside the hall, probably more I hadn't identified. Elder Mora had done impressive work evacuating non-combatants. I noticed that most of the families with children had vanished, along with the elderly and infirm. Those who remained were either warriors who knew what was coming, or visitors too drunk or distracted to notice the subtle exodus. 11:40. Celine stood abruptly, smoothing her red gown. She leaned down to whisper something to Demon, her hand trailing across his shoulders in what should have looked like affection, but read as possession. He nodded, and she glided away from the high table, moving toward the eastern gallery, a raised walkway that provided an excellent view of both the hall and the northern courtyard beyond the windows. Perfect vantage point to watch an alpha king fall. I followed at a distance, keeping to the edges of the room. The gallery was accessed by a narrow staircase partially hidden behind a tapestry depicting the pack's founding. Celine ascended gracefully, her gown whispering against stone. I counted to 10, then followed. The gallery was dim, lit only by a few scattered candles. Celine stood at the far end, her silhouette backlit by moonlight streaming through tall windows. She'd pulled back a curtain slightly, giving herself a clear view of the courtyard below. I pressed myself into the shadows, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. From here, I could see what she saw. The northern gate, the guards who appeared to be at their posts, but were actually positioned to fall back on command. Beyond the walls, I could sense movement in the darkness, predators circling. 11:43. I know you're there, little ghost, Celine said without turning around. Her voice was conversational, almost amused. Did you really think I wouldn't hear you following me? Smell your fear? My blood turned to ice. I stayed silent, frozen. She turned then, and in the moonlight, her beauty became something monstrous. You should have minded your own business. Should have stayed invisible like the nothing you are. She took a step toward me. But you just had to play hero, didn't you? Had to whisper your pathetic warning. He deserved to know the truth, I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. The truth? Celine laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. The truth is that Demon Frost is a fool who mistakes duty for strength, isolation for power. He's been dying slowly for years, drowning in responsibility and loneliness. I would have been doing him a favor by murdering him, by ending his suffering. She moved closer, and I saw the predator emerging, eyes brightening to amber, nails lengthening to claws. Now I'll have to settle for killing him the messy way, and you'll watch. Consider it punishment for interfering. 11:44. Below, I heard it, a distant crash as the northern gate was breached, not opened by an insider as planned, but smashed through by brute force. Something had changed. The Blackthorn wolves weren't waiting for their signal. Celine's head whipped toward the window, confusion flashing across her face. No, that's too soon. They're not. The great hall erupted into chaos. Through the windows, I watched Blackthorn warriors pour into the courtyard, dozens of them, shifting between human and wolf forms as they charged. But instead of finding easy prey, they ran straight into Demon's trap. Warriors emerged from concealed positions on rooftops, behind walls, from doorways, surrounding the attackers on all sides. The clash of combat rose even to our high gallery, snarls, shouts, the ring of steel against steel. No! Celine rushed to the window, pressing her face against the glass. This isn't how it was supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to know. Below, I caught sight of Demon in the courtyard, moving with lethal efficiency. He'd shed the formal jacket, fighting in just his shirt, his blade flashing in the moonlight as he cut through enemies with the precision of someone who'd been trained for violence since birth. Commander Rowan fought at his side, and Felix darted between larger combatants with the speed of youth and desperation. But more Blackthorn wolves kept coming. So many more than Felix had reported. This wasn't just an assault, it was an invasion. In the great hall below our gallery, the visiting traders revealed themselves. The man with scarred knuckles drew his weapon and lunged toward guests who scrambled away in panic. Pack warriors responded immediately, and suddenly the celebration had become a battlefield on two fronts. Celine spun away from the window, her face contorted with rage. This is your fault. All of this. She stalked toward me, fully shifting now, claws extending, teeth sharpening, eyes burning amber. If I can't have Demon, if I can't have this kingdom, then I'll settle for your life, little ghost. I backed away, but the gallery was narrow and I was running out of space. My wolf stirred within me, frightened but angry, wanting to fight, even though we both knew I was no match for Celine's trained ferocity. I'm not afraid of you, I lied. Yes, you are. I can smell it. She lunged. I dropped to the floor, rolling away as her claws raked the space where I'd been standing. Stone chips exploded from the wall behind me. I scrambled backward, searching desperately for anything that could serve as a weapon. My hand closed around a heavy candlestick. Celine laughed. Really? You think that will? I swung with everything I had, catching her across the jaw. Her head snapped to the side, more from surprise than actual damage, but it bought me precious seconds. I ran for the stairs, my feet barely touching the steps as I descended. Behind me, Selena's snarl promised violence. I burst back into the great hall, which had become a maelstrom of fighting. Pack warriors battled traders while trying to protect panicking guests. Furniture had been overturned, tapestries torn, the elegant celebration reduced to primal chaos. I saw Elder Mora across the room, her hands glowing with some kind of ancient magic as she held back two attackers. Saw young wolves I recognized from the kitchens fighting with serving knives and desperate courage. Celine emerged from the staircase behind me, blood on her lips where my desperate blow had split them. You can't run from me, little ghost. Not anymore. But I wasn't running. Not this time. I'd spent 15 years making myself invisible, making myself small and forgettable, letting fear dictate every choice. But something had changed tonight. Maybe it was Demon's words about blood not defining us. Maybe it was the way he'd looked at me like I mattered. Maybe it was simply that I was tired of being afraid. You're right, I said, turning to face her. I can't beat you in a fight. I'm not strong enough, not trained enough. I'm just the daughter of a traitor, a servant, a ghost. I felt my wolf rising, felt power I'd suppressed for years beginning to surface. But I don't need to beat you. I just need to make sure everyone sees what you really are. I raised my voice, projecting it across the hall with every ounce of strength I possessed. Celine Ashford is the traitor. She planned this attack with Blackthorn. She's been betraying the Alpha King from the beginning. Heads turned. Warriors paused mid-combat. And most importantly, Celine's remaining allies hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "Lies!" Celine shrieked. "She's delusional, just like her treacherous father." "Then explain why you're not surprised by this attack," I challenged, my voice carrying. "Explain why you positioned yourself to watch from the gallery. Explain why your hands are already bloodied when you haven't fought a single Blackthorn wolf." The great hall doors burst open. Demon strode in, covered in sweat and other people's blood, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto me, and then Celine behind me. "Stand down," he commanded, and his alpha presence was absolute. Every wolf in the room, friend or foe, felt the weight of it. "This ends now." Celine's composure finally cracked completely. Her beautiful face twisted into something ugly and desperate. "You were supposed to die. You were supposed to be weak, distracted. This was my kingdom, my destiny." "Your destiny," Demon said coldly, "is exile or execution. Choose." "I choose neither." Celine lunged, not at Demon, but at me. She was fast. So fast I barely registered the movement. But Demon was faster. He crossed the distance between us in a blur, intercepting Celine mid-leap. They collided with tremendous force, tumbling across the floor in a tangle of claws and fury. The fight was brief and brutal. Demon was a trained Alpha King. Celine was skilled, but had relied too long on manipulation rather than combat. It ended with Demon's hand at her throat, pressing her against the stone floor, his eyes glacial. "Yield," he commanded. For a moment, I thought she might refuse, might force him to finish it, but survival instinct won over pride. "I yield," she gasped. "Commander Rowan," Demon called without looking away from his defeated fiancée. "Silver restraints. Maximum security cell. She's to be held for trial." Rowan appeared with 2 other warriors, carrying chains that would suppress her wolf completely. As they dragged Celine away, she twisted to look at me one final time. "This isn't over, little ghost," she hissed. "There are always more shadows, more people who'll come for him. You can't protect him forever, maybe not." I replied quietly, "But I can try." The fighting in the courtyard had ended. Through the shattered windows, I could see Blackthorn wolves being rounded up, disarmed, secured. Some had surrendered peacefully once they'd realized their inside advantage had evaporated. Others had fought to the bitter end. The great hall looked like a storm had torn through it. Injured warriors were being tended to by healers who'd emerged from protective positions. The dead, and there were dead, I realized with a sinking heart, were being carried out with reverence. Demon stood in the center of the destruction, surveying the damage, the cost of betrayal written across his face. Then his eyes found mine across the room. He crossed to me, and I saw how exhausted he was, how the weight of leadership and violence had pressed down on him. But when he looked at me, something shifted in his expression, something almost like relief. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. "No." "Are you?" "Nothing that won't heal." He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched my cheek, where Celine had nearly caught me with her claws. "You were incredibly brave tonight, incredibly foolish, but brave." "I learned from the best," I said, trying for levity even though my hands were shaking. "Isla." He said my name like a prayer, like a promise. "You saved not just my life, but hundreds of lives tonight. You gave us the warning we needed. You tracked Celine's movements. You exposed her in front of witnesses. I just did what was right," I interrupted, suddenly uncomfortable with the weight of his gratitude. "Anyone would have—" "No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have stayed silent, stayed safe, but you chose courage over fear." His hand was still on my cheek, warm and solid. "Thank you." The moment stretched between us, fragile and new, full of possibilities I didn't dare name. Then Commander Rowan appeared at Demon's shoulder. "Sire, we need you. There are prisoners to process, wounded to account for, and the council is already gathering to discuss what happens next." Demon's hand dropped, and the spell broke. He straightened, the Alpha King sliding back into place over the man who'd briefly shown vulnerability. Of course. Isla, go with Elder Mora. She'll make sure you're safe while we sort through this mess. It felt like dismissal, and hurt bloomed in my chest, even though I had no right to it. I was still just the servant girl, the trader's daughter. Tonight had been an aberration, circumstances forcing our paths to cross. Now everything would return to normal. I curtsied, awkward and unpracticed, and turned to go. Isla. Demon's voice stopped me. When I looked back, his expression was complicated. This isn't finished. Between us. Once I've dealt with the immediate crisis, we need to talk. It wasn't a grand declaration or a promise, but it was something. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and let Elder Mora guide me away from the ruined celebration, into whatever uncertain future awaited. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the failed coup. The castle had returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the scars remained, both physical and otherwise. Shattered windows had been replaced, bloodstains scrubbed from stone floors, broken furniture removed, but the wounds cut deeper than architecture. Trust, once shattered, took longer to rebuild than walls. I stood in what had become my new room. Not the tiny servants' quarters I'd occupied for years, but a proper chamber in the residential wing, with windows overlooking the eastern gardens, and a bed soft enough to make me question reality every morning. Elder Mora had insisted, overriding my protests with the kind of maternal firmness that brooked no argument. "You're a hero of the pack now," she'd said, patting my hand. "Heroes don't sleep in closets." Hero. The word still felt foreign on my tongue, like clothes that didn't quite fit. The trial had been swift and public. Celine stood in silver chains before the assembled council, her beauty dimmed by defeat, and confessed everything. The affair with the Blackthorn commander, the planned assassination, the promised division of territories. She'd shown no remorse, only bitter rage that her carefully constructed plans had been undone by a worthless servant girl. The council had voted unanimously. Exile beyond the territories, stripped of pack bonds, forbidden to return on pain of death. I'd watched her led away, and felt nothing but a hollow sadness for the waste of it all. The Blackthorn pack had been dealt with more carefully. Their alpha claimed ignorance of the plot, blaming rogue elements within his ranks. Demon had been skeptical, but pragmatic. Executing an entire pack would mean war with their allies. Instead, reparations were demanded, hostages exchanged, borders redrawn. Politics, Elder Mora explained, was often about choosing the least terrible option. And through it all, I'd barely seen Demon. Oh, he'd acknowledged me publicly, thanked me before the council, ensured I was given new quarters and clothing appropriate to my changed status. But the private conversation he'd promised never materialized. He was drowning in the aftermath of betrayal, meeting with advisors from dawn to midnight, rebuilding alliances, reinforcing security, managing the delicate balance of power that kept the territories from descending into chaos. I told myself I understood, that I'd been foolish to hope for more, that the moment we'd shared in the Great Hall had been born of adrenaline and relief, nothing more. But my traitorous heart refused to listen. A knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Felix, the young tracker, grinning at me with the infectious enthusiasm that seemed permanently fixed to his face. "Morning, Isla. The Alpha King requests your presence in his study." "Well, technically Commander Rowan requests your presence on behalf of the Alpha King, but same difference, right?" My stomach flipped. "Did he say why?" "Nope. Just said it was important and you should come immediately." Felix's grin widened. "You're not in trouble if that's what you're worried about. I think. Probably not. Maybe 80% certain. That's not reassuring. Wasn't meant to be." He offered his arm with exaggerated chivalry. "Shall I escort you, my lady?" I rolled my eyes but took his arm, grateful for his easy friendship. Felix had appointed himself my unofficial guide to navigating pack politics, explaining hierarchies and introducing me to warriors who no longer looked through me but at me. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. We climbed the familiar spiral staircase to Demon's study, and Felix knocked briskly before pushing open the door without waiting for a response. "Delivery of 1 hero, as requested," he announced cheerfully. Demon looked up from his desk, and I saw the exhaustion etched into his face. New lines around his eyes, shadows beneath them that spoke of too many sleepless nights. But when his gaze landed on me, something shifted, softened. "Thank you, Felix. That will be all." Felix winked at me and disappeared, closing the door behind him with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. "You wanted to see me?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. I did. Demon stood, moving around the desk but maintaining distance, as if unsure of his welcome. "I owe you an apology. That wasn't what I'd expected." "For what?" "For avoiding you these past weeks. For not keeping my promise that we'd talk." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd never seen from him before. I told myself I was too busy, that pack business had to come first, and that was true, but it was also a cowardly excuse. "I don't understand. I was afraid," he said simply, and the admission clearly cost him. "The night of the attack, something shifted. You saw me, really saw me, in a way no one has in years. You chose to trust me despite having every reason not to, and I—" He paused, searching for words. I realized how profoundly lonely I'd been, how much I'd built walls around myself, convinced that isolation was strength. My heart hammered against my ribs. "And that scared you?" "Terrified me, because letting someone in means they can hurt you, betray you. And I'd just been reminded in the most violent way possible what betrayal looks like." He took a step closer, but then I realized something else. "You already had 100 opportunities to betray me, to use what you knew for personal gain. Instead, you risked everything to warn me. You asked for nothing in return." "That's not entirely true," I admitted quietly. I wanted to matter, to be seen, to prove that I was more than my father's legacy. And you did. You are." Another step closer. "Isla, these past weeks while I've been buried in political maneuvering and damage control, do you know what kept me going? It was remembering your courage, your compassion, the way you stood up to Celine even though you were terrified." "I was terrified," I confirmed, trying for levity to mask how his words were unraveling me. "She was going to turn me into ghost confetti." His lips quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. "Ghost confetti?" "I'm very pale." It seemed appropriate. This time he did smile, and it transformed his entire face. "There. That's what I've been missing. Your ridiculous humor in the face of everything terrible." The distance between us had shrunk to barely a foot. I could smell leather and pine and that wild scent that was uniquely his. My wolf pressed against my consciousness, alert and interested in a way she'd never been before. "Why am I really here, Demon?" I whispered. "Because I wanted to tell you that I'm done being a coward. Done hiding behind duty and responsibility as excuses not to feel anything." His hand lifted, hesitant, before gently cupping my cheek the way he had that night in the Great Hall. "These past weeks without you have been miserable. I kept finding excuses to ask people about you, to make sure you were settling in, to—" He laughed self-deprecatingly. "I've been pathetic, basically." The Alpha King. Pathetic? I don't believe it. Believe it. Commander Rowan threatened to lock me in a room with you if I didn't stop moping around the castle like a lovesick teenager. Joy bubbled up in my chest, effervescent and startling. "You've been moping?" "Extensively. Dramatically." There was sighing involved. I laughed, the sound surprising us both. When was the last time I'd laughed like that? Freely, without fear or self-consciousness. Demon's expression grew serious again, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "I know this is complicated. I know there are people who'll question this, who'll say you're too young or too new to pack politics or that I'm moving too fast after Celine's betrayal. And if you need time, if you need space, I understand. But I wanted you to know." He took a breath. "You matter to me, Isla Thorne. Not because you saved my life, though you did. Not because you're useful, though you are. But because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be human instead of just a king. Tears burned behind my eyes. I'm not good at this, at being vulnerable, at believing I deserve good things. Then we'll learn together. His forehead pressed against mine, and I felt his breath warm against my lips. What do you say? Will you give this broken, moody alpha king a chance to prove he can be more than his worst moments? I thought about my mother's words. When everyone looks away, you must learn to see. I'd seen Demon that first night, seen past the crown and the power to the lonely man beneath. And somehow, impossibly, he'd seen me too. Not the traitor's daughter or the invisible servant, but Isla. Just Isla. Yes, I breathed. Yes, He kissed me before I could finish, and the world narrowed to the point where we connected. His lips were gentle at first, asking permission, and I answered by rising on my toes and threading my fingers through his hair. The kiss deepened, became something fierce and desperate, and full of all the words we hadn't yet learned how to say. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine again. I should probably court you properly, he murmured. Take you to dinners, write you terrible poetry, ask permission from, well, you don't have family, but maybe Elder Mora? She's terrifying, I laughed breathlessly. She is, but I think she'd approve. Good, because I'm planning to keep you, Isla Thorne. Fair warning. Keep me? Like a pet? Like a mate. The word hung between us, heavy with meaning. Eventually, when you're ready, no pressure. My wolf surged at the word, joy and recognition flooding through me. Mate. The bond that went beyond romance or politics, that joined two souls at their deepest level. I think, I said slowly, I might already be ready. His eyes widened. Isla, you don't have to. I'm not saying we have to complete the bond tonight, but I'm saying, I choose this. I choose you. However complicated or difficult it gets. He kissed me again, softer this time, reverent. Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that choice. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Demon did court me properly, walks through the gardens, quiet dinners in his study, long conversations that stretched past midnight. He introduced me to the intricacies of pack politics, asked my opinion on matters of governance, listened when I pointed out things others missed. And slowly the pack's perception of me shifted. I was no longer the traitor's daughter or the lucky servant. I became Isla, the woman who stood beside their alpha king, who'd proven her loyalty with courage instead of bloodline. Not everyone approved, of course. There were whispers, sideways glances, people who thought I was reaching above my station. But there were also warriors who nodded respectfully when I passed. Elders who sought my input, young wolves who saw in me proof that your past didn't have to define your future. Elder Mora became the grandmother I'd never had, teaching me everything from proper table etiquette to the ancient pack histories. Felix appointed himself my personal guardian, hovering protectively whenever we ventured into public spaces. Commander Rowan, gruff and intimidating, started leaving books on leadership in my room with notes like, "Thought you might find this useful," scrawled in surprisingly elegant handwriting. I was building a family, a real one, chosen rather than inherited. 6 months after the night of the failed coup, Demon called another gathering in the Great Hall. I stood beside him on the dais, wearing a dress that Elder Mora had commissioned, deep blue like midnight sky, simple but elegant. My hair, finally properly cared for, fell in pale waves around my shoulders. The hall was packed. Every pack member who could attend had come, plus representatives from allied territories. I'd learned to read crowds now, to gauge mood and intention. Tonight there was curiosity, anticipation, but also warmth. Demon's hand found mine, our fingers intertwining naturally. That simple gesture of public affection sent a ripple through the assembly. 6 months ago, Demon began, his voice carrying easily through the space. This hall was attacked. We faced betrayal from within and enemies from without. We lost good people that night. He paused, acknowledging the moment of silence that followed. But we also discovered something important. We learned that true strength isn't about dominance or fear. It's about the courage to do what's right, even when it costs you everything. His thumb brushed across my knuckles, and I squeezed back. Isla Thorne showed me that courage. She risked her life to warn me of danger, asked for nothing in return, and stood against someone far more powerful, because it was right. In doing so, she saved not just my life, but the lives of hundreds. He turned to face me fully, and in the months since, she's continued to show me what it means to lead with compassion instead of just authority. My heart hammered as he continued. Which is why, before all of you as witnesses, I want to make this official. He released my hand only to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a simple silver ring etched with the pack's symbol. Isla Thorne, will you accept my formal claim? Will you stand beside me not as subject or servant, but as equal? Will you be my mate, my partner, and when you're ready, my queen? The hall erupted in gasps and whispers, but all I could see was Demon, this powerful, lonely man who'd somehow chosen me, despite having every reason not to. Yes, I said, my voice steady and sure. Yes to all of it. He slid the ring onto my finger, and the pack bonds that I'd always felt distantly suddenly surged into sharp focus. I wasn't just connected to Demon now, but to every wolf in the room, their emotions washing over me like waves. Joy, approval, excitement, and yes, some lingering doubt, but that was okay. Doubt could be overcome. Trust could be built. Demon pulled me close and kissed me in front of everyone, making our bond undeniably public. When we broke apart, the hall exploded in cheers and howls. Traditionally, Elder Mora announced from her place of honor, her voice dry but fond, this is where we'd have another feast. But perhaps we could skip the potential assassination attempts this time? Laughter rippled through the crowd, easing the remaining tension. The celebration that followed was nothing like that doomed engagement party. This felt real, joyful, built on foundation of truth rather than political maneuvering. Warriors who'd fought beside us that night clapped me on the back with genuine warmth. Young wolves asked excited questions about everything from the attack to my dress. Even the skeptical elders grudgingly acknowledged that Demon had chosen well. Later, much later, when the festivities had finally wound down and we'd escaped to the privacy of Demon's chambers, our chambers now, he pulled me close on the balcony overlooking the moonlit territories. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Speaking up that night, everything that came after, I thought about the girl I'd been 6 months ago. Invisible, afraid, convinced she deserved nothing good. Then I thought about who I was now, seen, valued, building something real with someone who'd chosen me not despite my past, but because of who I'd proven myself to be. Not for a second, I said truthfully. Do you? Regret me? Impossible. He kissed my temple. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, Isla Thorne. Soon to be Isla Frost. That's going to take some getting used to. We have time. All the time in the world. His arms tightened around me. No more running. No more hiding. Just us, building something worth protecting. I leaned back against his chest, watching moonlight paint silver across the forest that had once seemed so threatening. My wolf stirred contentedly. Finally at peace. Finally home. Just us, I agreed. And a few hundred pack members, and political alliances to maintain. And, shh, he laughed softly. You're ruining the romantic moment. Someone has to keep you grounded, Alpha King. That's what I have you for. His lips brushed against my ear. My mate, my conscience, my impossible, brave, ridiculous Isla. Yours, I confirmed, the word no longer scary but full of promise. Always yours. The moon rose higher, blessing us with her ancient light, and somewhere in the forest, wolves howled their approval. I'd been invisible once, the girl no one noticed, carrying the weight of a father's sins and a lifetime of rejection. But I'd learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from vulnerability. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. That you can rewrite your story if you're brave enough to pick up the pen. I was Isla Thorne. No. Isla Frost, now. Not a ghost anymore, but something real and solid and worthy of love. And this, finally, was where I belonged.